The cage rattled to the surface at 6:14 a.m. on a Thursday, and the world had already ended. I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that the skip operator wasn't in his booth. The hoist house lights were off, and the safety latch on the collar gate was hanging open. 3 violations that would have gotten someone fired on any normal shift. I stood on the steel platform of the cage with my headlamp still on, breathing the first outside air I'd tasted in 9 days. And I listened. No diesel generators, no compressor drone, no voices carrying across the yard from the dry house where second shift should have been suiting up. The Greylock mine ran 24 hours. In the 3 years I'd worked the deep development heading at level 42, I had never once surfaced to silence. My name is Colton Dwyer. I'm 36 years old. I'm a development miner for Greylock Gold Corp in the Central Nevada Basin. And for the last 9 days, I'd been underground on a deep rotation cycle with a 4-man crew pushing a new exploratory drift at the 4,200-foot level. No cell reception down there. No radio contact with the surface, except through the mine's internal comm system, which only reached the skip station at level 12. Below that, you were in the rock, and the rock was all there was. 9 days is a long rotation, but not unusual for deep work. The company had been running extended cycles since the new vein showed high-grade assay results. We slept in a pressurized bunk pod at the 3,800-foot staging area, ate vacuum-sealed meals heated on a propane ring, and marked time by drill rounds and blast schedules. The 4 of us, me, Harlan Gage, Luis Paloma, and a young Nigerian contract geologist everyone called Dex, had settled into the rhythm of deep work. You stop thinking about the surface. The mine becomes the whole world. Your body forgets sunlight. Now I stood in sunlight and couldn't make sense of what it was showing me. The equipment yard was untouched. Haul trucks parked in rows, the fuel depot locked. But every vehicle in the employee lot had its doors open. Not all the way, some just cracked, some swung wide, as if 40 people had stepped out of their cars at the same time and never bothered to close them. Harlan came up beside me on the platform and pulled his hard hat off, squinting against the morning glare. He was 53, crew-led, 22 years underground, a man who did not waste language on speculation. He said, "That ain't right." Luis was next out of the cage. He was already reaching for his phone. He held it up, turned a slow circle, shook it. No signal. Nothing. Dex stepped out last, the sample bag slung across his chest, clinking softly. He looked at the parking lot, then at the empty guard shack at the mine gate, then at the road beyond it that led to the town of Callister, 11 miles south. The road was empty in both directions. "Where's the skip operator?" Dex asked. The question was directed at all of us, but he was looking at me because I was the one who had family in Callister. I was the one with something to get back to. I had a wife named Renee, a 12-year-old son named Eli, a 7-year-old daughter named Grace, and my mother, Patricia, who had lived with us since my father died, who watched the kids when Renee worked her nursing shifts at Basin County Medical. 4 people in a 3-bedroom house on Mineral Street, 9.5 minutes from where I stood if I drove the speed limit. I never drove the speed limit coming off rotation. "I'm taking a truck," I said. Harlan caught my arm. Not hard, just enough. "We should check the dry house first. Office. See if there's a note, a radio, something. My family's 11 miles away and nobody's answering the phone. And if something happened bad enough to empty this mine, you driving into it blind ain't gonna help them." I knew he was right. I hated that he was right. We went to the dry house. The dry house was where miners changed and showered between shifts. Lockers, benches, a wall of cubbies for boots. It smelled like copper dust and industrial soap, same as always. But the lockers were open, not ransacked, abandoned mid-action. A boot half pulled off, left on the bench. A thermos still warm to the touch. The television in the break area was on, but showing static. Luis found the mine's surface radio in the shift supervisor's office. He turned the dial through every frequency. Commercial bands, dead. Emergency channels, dead. He found one signal, a looped recording on a FEMA frequency. A woman's voice reading instructions that sounded like they'd been scripted before whatever happened had finished happening. Shelter in place. Avoid contact with symptomatic individuals. Symptoms included loss of coordinated speech, involuntary repetitive motion, and aggression without provocation. Aggression without provocation, Harlan repeated quietly. He said it the way you read a label on something you're not sure is yours. Dex had pulled the office computer awake. No internet. But the local network cache still held the last batch of emails downloaded to the server. He scrolled and read fragments aloud. Most were internal production reports, safety memos. Then he found one from the mine's corporate liaison in Reno. Sent 6 days ago. Subject line, immediate stand-down, all surface operations. The body of the email was 4 sentences. A public health emergency of unknown origin had been declared across 11 western states. All non-essential operations were to cease. Personnel were to evacuate to designated municipal shelters. Underground crews were to be recalled immediately. 6 days ago, Luis said. They were supposed to pull us up 6 days ago. The skip operator had been the one responsible for our retrieval. He was supposed to send the cage down with a recall signal if the surface needed us. The signal never came. Either he couldn't send it, or he was already gone. I was at the door before Harlan finished reading the rest. He called after me, but I was across the yard, climbing into the cab of a white company pickup with the keys in the sun visor where drivers always left them. The engine turned over on the first try. I pulled through the open gate and hit the access road south toward Callister. The road was a 2-lane blacktop through basin scrubland, straight enough that you could see 3 miles ahead. I saw no traffic, no movement. The morning was bright and clear and absolutely still. And that stillness pressed against the windshield like something solid. I passed the junction where Highway 93 crossed the mine road and looked both directions. Nothing. A semi-truck was parked on the shoulder a quarter mile east, cab door open, engine off. I didn't stop. 5 miles out from Callister, I saw the first body. It was on the road. A woman in jeans and a dark jacket, face down, not moving. I slowed. I almost stopped. Then she moved. Not the way a person moves, not rolling over, not pushing herself up. Her arms stayed flat and her torso lifted from the hips, a mechanical hinge motion. And her head turned toward the sound of my engine with a speed that didn't match the rest of her body. I accelerated past her. In the mirror, I saw her stand the rest of the way up in one smooth motion, like a door swinging open. She watched the truck. She didn't follow. My hands were shaking on the wheel. The FEMA recording hadn't used the word. The email hadn't used the word. But I'd seen enough movies, read enough books, had enough barstool conversations with Harlan on slow shifts. I knew what I'd just seen. And every mile between me and Mineral Street felt like a year being stripped from the time I'd already wasted underground while the world collapsed above me. Callister looked like a photograph of itself. The buildings were intact. The traffic lights worked, cycling through green and yellow and red for intersections no one was using. The Chevron station on the north end had its pumps running and its convenience store door propped open with a mop bucket. I passed the elementary school Grace's school and saw the marquee still reading Spring Book, Fair May 8th to 12th. I didn't know today's date. I'd lost count underground. The book fair had been scheduled for the week after we went down. I turned onto Mineral Street doing 60 in a 25 zone. Our house was the fourth on the left, a tan stucco single story with a gravel yard and a chain-link fence I'd been meaning to replace since we moved in. Renee's Subaru was in the driveway. My mother's Buick was parked on the street. Both had their doors closed. That felt like a good sign. I told myself it was a good sign. I left the truck running and went through the front door. It was unlocked. The living room was clean. The television was off. Grace's backpack was on the kitchen table, unzipped, a worksheet half finished in purple crayon. Eli's basketball shoes were by the back door, laces still tied in the knots he never bothered to undo. The coffee maker had a full pot, cold, dark as motor oil. "Renee?" My voice broke the silence like a rock through glass. "Eli? Grace? Mom?" I cleared the house room by room. Master bedroom, bed made, Renee's phone on the charger, dead. Eli's room, curtains open, bed unmade, laptop closed on the desk. Grace's room, stuffed animals arranged on the pillow in the order she insisted on. The tiger first, then the rabbit, then the bear. My mother's room at the end of the hall, reading glasses on the nightstand, Bible open to a page I didn't look at. Her blood pressure medication lined up next to a glass of water. Everything present. Everyone gone. I stood in the hallway between the bedrooms and felt gravity double. Not fear, not yet. Something heavier. The certainty that I was standing inside the shape of an interrupted life and that the interruption had not been gentle, no matter how neatly it had left the furniture. People who leave calmly take their phones. They take their medication. They take the purple crayon. I went back to the kitchen and opened the junk drawer. Under the takeout menus and spare batteries was the .357 revolver I kept loaded. The one Renee hated. The one I'd promised to move to a safe when Grace started asking what was in the drawer. I checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. I put it in my waistband and went to the neighbors. The Munoz house was empty. Same pattern doors unlocked, food on the counter, car in the driveway. Across the street, the Beltran place. Same. The Okafor house at the end of the block had a dog in the backyard, a German Shepherd mix, barking itself hoarse against the fence. It had water but no food in its bowl. It had been alone for days. I fed the dog. I don't know why. The world was ending. And I stood in a stranger's yard, scooping kibble from a bin in the garage, while a German Shepherd licked my hand like I was the answer to a prayer. I think I needed to do one thing that made simple sense before I did the things that wouldn't. I drove back to the mine. I didn't want to. Every cell in my body screamed to keep searching the school, the hospital, the shelter locations, the FEMA recording mentioned, but never specified. But I had 5 rounds left after the one I'd put into a lock at the school's front entrance to get inside and find it empty. And I had no information, no map of the crisis, no understanding of how many of those things were between me and anywhere worth going. What I had was 3 men at the mine who had skills and calm and their own reasons to survive. Harlan, Luis, and Dex were in the equipment yard when I pulled in. They'd been busy. The mine gate was closed and chained. Luis had found a pump-action shotgun and a box of shells in the security office. Harlan had the surface radio running on a generator, scanning in slow rotation. Dex had spread a Nevada road map across the hood of a haul truck and was marking towns with a red pen based on what he'd picked up from a fragmentary CB transmissions. "Your family?" Harlan asked. Gone. House was empty. The whole town is empty. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say we'd find them. He looked at me the way a man looks at a load-bearing wall that started to crack, not with pity, but with calculation about how long it would hold. We got some picture of what happened, he said. Dex, tell him. Dex walked me through it. From the cached emails, from CB chatter, from the FEMA loop, from a battery-operated AM radio Luis had found in someone's locker that still pulled a station out of Reno. The outbreak had started 11 days ago in 3 simultaneous clusters: Sacramento, Phoenix, and Salt Lake City. No confirmed origin. It moved through population centers along highway corridors. Infection was bite-transmitted, onset within 4 to 9 hours, and the result was what Dex clinically called ambulatory post-mortem aggression. The infected died first. Heartbeat, respiration, higher brain function all ceased. Then they got back up, and what got them up wasn't anything medicine had a name for. The military had established containment lines across the western U.S. within 48 hours. By 72 hours, the lines had failed. National Guard units were operating independently. FEMA infrastructure had fragmented. The Reno station was broadcasting from a university basement, and the host sounded like she hadn't slept since it started. "What about Callister?" I asked. "Was there an evacuation?" Basin County issued a shelter-in-place that turned into an evacuation order 3 days ago, Dex said. National Guard convoy was supposed to collect from the high school gymnasium and move north to a camp near Winnemucca. Winnemucca was 140 miles northwest. If my family had gone with the convoy, they were there. If they hadn't gone with the convoy, they were somewhere in the basin, in the scrub, in the silence, in the company of things that moved wrong. "I'm going to Winnemucca," I said. Harlan folded his arms. "Not tonight, you're not. My kids are... Your kids might be in Winnemucca, and they might not. You drive 140 miles at night through open desert on roads you haven't scouted. You're dead before you learn the answer. We go at first light. We go prepared. We go together." Luis said, "He's right, Colt. I want to get south to my sister in Tonopah, but not in the dark, not like this." I looked at Dex. He shrugged one shoulder. "I have no one in this country, so I go where the group goes." That sentence, "I have no one in this country," landed on me with a weight I didn't have room to carry. Here was a man with no family on this continent, calmly organizing information that might save mine, and the best I'd offered him in 3 years of working together was a nickname I'd never asked if he liked. "Your real name," I said. "What is it?" He looked surprised. Adedayo Okonkwo." "Okay, Adedayo. First light, Winnemucca." We spent that night in the mine's administrative building, a cinder block rectangle with small windows and steel doors that Harlan had secured with bolts from the maintenance shop. Luis took first watch on the roof with a shotgun and a pair of binoculars from the geology office. I lay on a cot in the shift supervisor's room and did not sleep. I thought about the last thing I'd said to Renee before going underground. It was nothing. Literally nothing worth remembering. I'd kissed her in the kitchen while she packed Eli's lunch and said something about picking up dog food when I got back, even though we didn't have a dog. And she'd laughed and said, "We still don't have a dog, Colt." And I'd said, "But when we do." And that was it. That was the last exchange. 9 days ago, or 11, or however many it was now, I'd walked out the door carrying a joke about a dog we didn't own, and left my family on the wrong side of the surface while the world came apart. Eli would be scared. He was 12, but he felt things older than his age, carried worry like an adult, watched the news, and asked questions I couldn't always answer. Grace would follow Renee. She was 7, and she trusted her mother completely. A trust so total, it functioned as gravity wherever Renee went. Grace went, without question, without hesitation. My mother would have been the one to organize. She'd survived my father's long death from lung disease, had buried him with the same calm efficiency she used to can tomatoes. And if anyone in that house had heard the evacuation order and moved the family to the high school gymnasium, it was Patricia Dwyer. I held on to that. I built it into a structure I could stand on. My mother heard the order. She drove them to the school. The guard came. They went to Winnemucca. They were alive and waiting, and I'd find them. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Luis came down from the roof and woke Harlan for second watch. He sat on the cot across from me and cleaned the shotgun by flashlight. He didn't ask if I was awake. He knew. "I keep thinking about my sister's kids," he said after a while. "She's got 2 girls, 11 and 9. Their dad's no use. He left last year, lives in Fresno. If my sister didn't get out of Tonopah, those girls are alone, or they're with neighbors, or they're—" He stopped, racked the slide, checked the chamber, set it down. I can't finish that sentence. I just can't put the last word on it. "Then don't," I said. He nodded. We sat in the dark and listened to the desert wind press against the cinder block. And somewhere, far off and to the south, a sound carried through the still air. It might have been a coyote. It might have been something a coyote used to be. Neither of us mentioned it. We left at dawn in 2 vehicles, the White Company pickup and a diesel haul truck that Harlan insisted on, because it weighed 14 tons, and nothing short of a wall was going to stop it. I drove the pickup. Luis rode with me. Harlan and Adedayo took the haul truck. We had the shotgun, my revolver, a fire axe from the mine's emergency station, 2 cases of water, a first aid kit, and whatever canned food Luis had pulled from the break room vending area. We had a road map and no GPS, no cell signal, and a 1/4 tank of gas in the pickup, supplemented by 10 gallons in jerry cans from the fuel depot. Highway 93 North was clear for the first 30 miles. The road cut through basin and range terrain, flat salt valleys between low mountain ridges, sagebrush and dust and sky so big it made you feel like an insect on a dinner plate. We passed vehicles on the shoulder, some crashed, some parked. A minivan with the rear window shattered from the inside. A delivery truck jackknifed across the southbound lane. I kept my eyes forward and my speed at 50, fast enough to cover ground, slow enough to stop if the road was blocked. At the junction with State Route 789, we found the first real sign of organized human activity. A roadblock, 2 Nevada Highway Patrol cruisers parked nose to nose across the northbound lane, light bars dark, engines off. Beside them, a handwritten sign on a sheet of plywood. Winnemucca Camp, relocated Battle Mountain, follow I-80 East. Below that, a date, 8 days ago. Relocated, Luis said. What does relocated mean? Means the camp moved, or got overrun, or got absorbed into something bigger. I was already recalculating. Battle Mountain was another 60 miles east on Interstate 80. More distance, more fuel, more road we hadn't scouted. But the sign was official highway patrol vehicles, formatted instructions. Someone with authority had put this here for exactly the people who were doing what we were doing. I honked twice. Harlan pulled the haul truck alongside, and I pointed at the sign. He read it, looked at the map Adedayo held up through the window, and gave a single nod. We turned east. Interstate 80 was worse than 93. More vehicles, more evidence of panic. A line of cars stretched for half a mile near the Golconda exit, all stopped, all empty, doors open, belongings scattered on the asphalt. Suitcases, coolers, a car seat with the straps unbuckled. I drove on the shoulder and tried not to look at the car seat longer than I had to. Luis was quiet beside me. His hand rested on the shotgun across his lap. Outside Valmy, we saw our first group. They were standing in a loose cluster on the median, maybe 20 of them, motionless, facing the same direction like they were watching something in the distance, only they could see. The morning sun lit their faces. Some were marked with obvious wounds. Others looked untouched. A woman in a hospital gown. A man in mechanic's coveralls. A child small, maybe 8 or 9, standing among them with the same vacant orientation, wearing a backpack with a cartoon character on it that I recognized because Grace had the same one. I gripped the wheel hard enough to feel the stitching in the leather bite my palms. Luis put his hand on my forearm. He didn't say anything. He just held on until we were past them. We reached Battle Mountain by late morning. The town was small, 3,000 people before, a mining and ranching community on the Humboldt River. Now it was a staging ground. The camp had been set up in the fairgrounds on the east side of town. Military tents, Jersey barriers, a razor wire perimeter manned by a mix of National Guard and civilian volunteers with hunting rifles. A hand-painted banner over the main gate read, "Battle Mountain Emergency Shelter, FEMA Region 9. Below it, someone had added in smaller letters, "Intake closed." A guard sergeant named Woodall met us at the gate. He was maybe 24, sunburned, running on caffeine and duty. He checked us for bites, arms, neck, torso, and asked where we'd come from. When I said the Greylock mine, he looked at me like I'd said Mars. "You've been underground this whole time?" 9 days on deep rotation. We surfaced yesterday. Yesterday. He said it twice, as if repetition would make it fit. "You missed all of it." I know what I missed. I need to find my family. Renee Dwyer, 2 children, my mother, Patricia. They were in Callister. They would have been evacuated to the Winnemucca camp, then redirected here. Woodall took me to the intake processing tent. A civilian volunteer named Beth, middle-aged, glasses, hands that shook when she wasn't holding a clipboard, ran through the registration binders. The system was pen and paper. Names, dates, origin towns, medical status. She went through 3 binders of Callister evacuees, running her finger down every page. Dwyer, Renee, yes, admitted to Winnemucca camp 6 days ago with 2 minors and 1 elderly dependent. Transferred here with the camp relocation 3 days ago. She flipped pages. Assigned to tent row C, number 14. The relief hit me so hard, I had to put my hands on the folding table to stay standing. Luis grabbed my shoulder. Harlan, behind me, let out a breath I hadn't heard him holding. "Row C, 14, I said. "Where is that?" Beth hesitated. She looked at Woodall. Woodall looked at his boots. "Row C was in the east quadrant," Beth said carefully. "The east quadrant was breached 2 nights ago. The perimeter fence failed at the southeast corner. Guard units re-established the line, but..." She trailed off. The clipboard shook in her hands. "But what?" "Row C was evacuated during the breach. Some residents made it to the west quadrant. Some didn't. We're still reconciling names." Reconciling. The word tasted like metal. "Show me the west quadrant list." She showed me. Renee's name was not on it. Eli's name was not on it. Grace's name was not on it. Patricia's name was not on it. "That doesn't mean..." Beth started. "Where's the east quadrant?" Woodall stepped in front of me, not aggressively, carefully, the way you step in front of someone walking toward a ledge. The east quadrant is still unsecured. We cleared the tents, but we haven't cleared the perimeter zone. There are still active infected in the brush east of the fence line. I cannot let you go in there. Sergeant, my wife, my children, and my mother were in that quadrant 2 nights ago. I am going in there. He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at Harlan, who stood behind me like a wall, then at Luis, who had the shotgun resting casually against his shoulder, then at Adedayo, who had said nothing but whose stillness carried its own weight. I'll give you an escort to the fence line, Woodall said. After that, you're on your own, and I didn't authorize it. The east quadrant looked like a storm had passed through it with hands. Tents collapsed, cots overturned, personal belongings scattered across the trampled grass, shoes and blankets, and plastic water bottles, and a child's drawing pinned to a tent stake, flapping in the wind. The Jersey barriers at the southeast corner were displaced, shoved inward, and the razor wire had been pulled apart in a gap wide enough for bodies to pass through. On the ground near the gap were dark stains that the dust hadn't finished covering. I found tent C-14. The canvas was half collapsed, but the interior was intact enough to read. 2 cots pushed together Renee and Grace. I knew immediately, because Grace wouldn't sleep alone. A folding cot against the far wall, my mother. A sleeping bag on the ground, Eli, who at 12 considered himself too old for a cot and too young to complain about the floor. A suitcase I recognized as the blue roller from our bedroom closet, packed with clothes I recognized. Renee's green flannel, Eli's basketball jersey, Grace's striped leggings, my mother's blood pressure medication in a Ziploc bag, tucked into the suitcase's mesh pocket. She'd packed it, she'd brought it, she was still taking it. That meant she'd been alive and organized when they left Callister. That meant the Patricia I knew, the one who survived my father, who canned tomatoes in August heat, who would have stood in front of her grandchildren like a steel door had been functioning. I searched the rest of the tent. Under one of the cots, I found Eli's phone. The battery was dead. I pocketed it. Under my mother's cot, I found her Bible, the same one I'd seen on her nightstand in Callister. A bus ticket from the Winnemucca camp tucked into the pages as a bookmark. She'd carried it the whole way. Luis searched the neighboring tents and came back with information. A woman in C11 had told a guard medic during the evacuation that several families from Row C had run east through the breach when the west route was blocked. East was open desert, then scrub hills, then a county road that led to the small ranching settlement of Dunphy, about 8 miles away. Dunphy, Harlan said, looking at the map. There's nothing in Dunphy. A post office and a gas station, if that. If Renee was running with the kids and my mother, she'd go to the nearest structure. She'd find walls and a door, and she'd get behind them. You're guessing. I'm doing the math on who my wife is. She doesn't panic. She finds the next fixed point and moves to it. Dunphy's the nearest fixed point. We took the pickup. Harlan stayed at Battle Mountain to secure fuel and supplies. Adedayo stayed with him. Luis came with me because Luis understood that the thing pulling me east was the same thing pulling him south, and that neither of us could stop the other. So the best we could do was not let the other go alone. The road to Dunphy was dirt and gravel, washboarded and narrow, cutting through hills of sage and juniper. We drove slowly. The landscape felt watched. Not by people, by the absence of people, a negative presence that pressed in from both sides of the road. We reached Dunphy in 40 minutes. It was what Harlan said it would be: a post office, a gas station, a dozen scattered ranch structures in various states of repair. And something else. A church. white clapboard. Small, the kind built by ranching families 100 years ago. Its front door was closed and barricaded from the outside with a cattle gate wired to the frame. Barricaded from the outside. Luis and I looked at each other. You don't barricade a building from the outside to keep people safe inside. You barricade it to keep something inside from getting out. I approached the church with a revolver drawn, and my heart doing something that felt less like beating, and more like a fist pounding on a locked door. Luis flanked to the right, shotgun up, and circled to check the windows. The clapboard walls were old but solid. The windows were high and narrow, covered from the inside with what looked like dark fabric. "Colt," Luis said from the side of the building. His voice was flat and controlled, which meant it was bad. "There's writing on the west wall." I came around. Spray painted in red, in letters 2 feet high, someone had written, "They turned, do not open, God forgive us." I stood there and read it 3 times. Each reading cost something. The first took my breath. The second took the structure I'd built. My mother heard the order. She drove them to the school. The guard came. They went to Winnemucca. They're alive. The third took the version of myself that had been operating on momentum since I'd surfaced from that mine. The version running on adrenaline and logistics, and the refusal to finish the sentence. Luis couldn't finish about his sister's girls. "We don't know it's them," Luis said. He was beside me now. "There were a lot of people who ran east. This could be anyone." "It could be. We can check. We look through the window. We just look." I climbed onto a rusted water trough beneath one of the side windows and used my knife to peel back the corner of the fabric, a dark bed sheet, tacked to the frame with roofing nails. I pressed my face to the glass and let my eyes adjust. The interior was dim. Pews pushed to the walls, shapes on the floor, a dozen, maybe 15, standing in the open space between the altar and the front pews, standing the way the group on the interstate median had been standing, still, oriented, facing one direction, facing the door. I scanned them one by one. A man in a ranch coat, a woman in pajamas, 2 teenagers side by side, a small figure in a floral dress. Then I saw her. 3rd row from the back, near the wall, my mother. Standing with her hands at her sides, her reading glasses still on her face, her white hair pulled back the way she always wore it. Her eyes were open and fixed on the door. She wasn't breathing. Nothing in that room was breathing. I came down off the trough and sat on the ground with my back against the church wall and stayed there for a while. Luis sat next to me. He didn't speak. The wind moved through the sage and the sun was warm, and my mother was 10 feet away on the other side of a clapboard wall. And she was dead, and she was standing. And those 2 facts existed in the same sentence now, and I could not make them stop. "I don't see Renee," I said finally, "or the kids. She's in there, but they're not." We searched every structure in Dunphy. The gas station had been used as a temporary shelter, water bottles, blankets, a battery-powered lantern still flickering on its last charge. In the back office, I found a logbook someone had started. Dates, names, notes. Shaking handwriting that got worse as the pages progressed. The entries told a story. A group of about 20 had fled the Battle Mountain camp breach and reached Dunphy on foot. They'd sheltered in the church and the gas station. On the second night, 5 members of the group showed symptoms. By the 3rd morning, 10 had turned. The remaining survivors locked the turned inside the church and left, heading north toward a ranch compound someone knew about 30 miles up a canyon road. The log listed names. I read each one with my finger on the page, moving slowly, giving every letter its full weight. I found my mother, Patricia D. Turned night 2, secured in church with others. 2 lines below, Renee D., and 2 children left with North Group, Dawn, day 3. My hand was shaking so badly the page blurred. Luis read it over my shoulder and gripped the back of my neck. Not a comfort gesture, a stabilizing one. The way you hold something that's vibrating too hard to function. Renee was alive. She'd been alive as of 2 days ago. She'd left with a group heading north. She had Eli and Grace. She'd left my mother behind because my mother had turned, and there was no choice. And Renee would have made that choice the way she made every hard choice, with a scream locked behind her teeth and her children's hands in hers. I took the logbook. The ranch was described only as the Carver Place, up Sheep Creek Canyon, about 30 miles. There was a hand-drawn map in the margin, crude but legible, a line tracing a canyon road north from Dunphy, with an X at the end. We drove. The canyon road was unpaved, rocky, climbing through pinyon juniper hills along a dry creek bed. It was slow going. The pickup suspension complained on every washout. We saw no infected. We saw no people. The canyon narrowed, and the road threaded between rock walls, stained with mineral deposits that glinted in the afternoon light, like the gold-bearing quartz I'd spent 3 years drilling through. I thought about how the earth held its treasure in veins, hidden, protected by thousands of feet of rock, and how I'd spent my professional life extracting it, and how what I was extracting now was just information about whether the people I loved were still configured in the shape of living. 14 miles in, we found a truck blocking the road, an old Ford flatbed parked sideways across the canyon, with hay bales stacked on the bed to form a wall. Behind it, a man with a deer rifle standing on the cab roof. He was maybe 60, lean, weathered, wearing a canvas jacket and a hat that had seen more sun than I'd seen in my life. "That's far enough," he called. I stopped, rolled down the window. "We're looking for the Carver Ranch. A group came up from Dunphy 2 days ago. My wife and children are with them." He studied us. The rifle didn't move. "What's your wife's name?" "Renee Dwyer. 2 kids, Eli and Grace." Something shifted in his posture. The rifle lowered 1 degree. "Renee's at the ranch. Kids are with her. They're okay." The sound that came out of me was not something I would have made in front of anyone if I'd had any say in the matter. "Lena." Luis turned away to give me the privacy that the cab of a pickup truck couldn't actually provide. The man on the truck waited. "I'm Dale Carver," he said when I could hear language again. "Follow me in. Stay on the road. Don't approach the buildings until I signal." The Carver Ranch was a compound in the practical sense. A main house, 2 bunkhouses, a barn, and a machine shop arranged around a gravel yard, surrounded by a cattle fence that had been reinforced with welded steel panels and topped with concertina wire from a military supply that Dale's son, a former Guard reservist, had stockpiled years ago. There were maybe 30 people inside the perimeter. Some from Battle Mountain, some from Dunphy, some ranch families from the surrounding area. A generator powered the main house. A well provided water. Cattle in the east pasture provided protein. It was organized, calm, and functional in a way that felt almost offensive after the desolation of the road. Dale led me through the gate and pointed toward the bunkhouse on the right. I walked. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, someone whose body hadn't decided yet whether to shake apart or hold together. The bunkhouse door opened and Renee came out. She was thinner. Her hair was pulled back tight. She was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, borrowed, donated, the wardrobe of survival rather than identity. She saw me and stopped. She stood in the doorway, and her face did something I will never be able to describe, because the language for it hasn't been built yet. It was not relief. It was not joy. It was the expression of a woman who had buried the idea of her husband in order to keep moving and now had to unbury it in the space of a second. And the excavation was not painless. Colt. She said my name like a question, like she needed me to confirm I was the answer. I crossed the yard and I held her, and she broke against me the way I'd broken in the truck, and we stood there in the gravel in front of strangers, and neither of us cared. Eli came out next. He was taller, impossible in 9 days, but I swear he was taller, and he hit me at full speed and buried his face in my chest and said, "I thought you were dead underground. I thought the mine collapsed and nobody told us." And I realized he'd been carrying his own version of my nightmare, a mirror image, the same terror inverted. Grace came last. She came out slowly, holding Renee's borrowed jacket in one hand. And she looked at me from the doorway with an expression I knew, the cautious assessment of a 7-year-old who has learned in the last week that the world gives things back only to take them again. I knelt down. I opened my arms. She studied me for 3 full seconds, and then she ran. I held all 3 of them in the gravel yard of a stranger's ranch in a canyon I'd never heard of in a world that had ended. And for the first time in days, I stopped calculating. I stopped planning. I stopped running logistics in my head. I just held. Luis stood by the truck with the shotgun across his chest and watched. When I looked at him, he nodded once. Then he said, "Tonopah's still south." I understood. He'd carried me to my family. Now his family was waiting. This was where our roads diverged. That evening, around a fire pit in the ranch yard, Renee told me what I'd missed. She told it the way she told everything clearly, in order, without embellishment, the nurse's instinct for clinical narrative serving her even now. She'd been at work when the first reports came in. Basin County Medical. The ER received 3 patients in the first hour. A highway patrol officer bitten during a traffic stop. A rancher's wife who'd been attacked in her own kitchen. And a child found wandering on Route 93 with wounds on both arms. The officer died on the table and reanimated 6 minutes later. He bit a tech and the tech bit a nurse, and by the time the hospital went into lockdown, the infection was already inside. Renee left. She drove to the school, pulled Eli and Grace, and went home for my mother. Patricia had already heard the news on her kitchen radio and had packed the blue suitcase. They drove to the high school gymnasium per the emergency broadcast. The guard convoy arrived the next morning. They rode a military transport to Winnemucca, then to Battle Mountain when the Winnemucca camp was consolidated. "Your mother was strong," Renee said. She used past tense without flinching, which told me she'd already done her grieving. She organized the tent row, made sure the kids had water and the elderly had their meds. When the breach happened, she was the one who woke everyone. She turned during the evacuation? No, after. We ran east, and she was bitten during the run. She didn't tell me. She hid it under her sleeve. I found out in Dunphy when her fever spiked and she couldn't stand. Renee paused. The firelight moved on her face. She asked me to put her in the church with the others. She said, "Don't let the children see me become something else." Those were her words. I stared at the fire. Somewhere in my chest, a room I didn't know existed opened. And inside, It was a version of my mother making the same calculated, unsentimental, loving decisions she'd made every day of her life. Absorbing the cost, directing the action, protecting the people who couldn't see what she could see. Did she? She walked in on her own. She was still herself when we closed the door. Renee's voice fractured for the first time. She repaired it immediately. She told Grace she was going to rest in the pretty building and that Mommy would take them somewhere safe. Grace had been asleep on Eli's lap across the fire. Eli was awake, listening. He'd heard all of this before. His face was the face of a 12-year-old who had been promoted to a rank no child should hold. And his eyes, when they met mine, carried a question he didn't ask aloud. Are you going to be okay? Or am I still the one who has to be? I reached across the fire circle and put my hand on his knee. You did good, Eli. You did so good. He crumbled, quietly, privately, in the way of boys who've been holding the fort too long. Renee pulled him against her. Grace didn't wake. Luis left the next morning. I gave him the pickup, the remaining gas, the revolver with 4 rounds, and every piece of information we'd gathered about the roads south. Harlan and Adedayo were still at Battle Mountain. Luis would stop there, resupply, and continue to Tonopah. We stood by the truck in the early light and shook hands. And I realized I was saying goodbye to a man who had kept me alive, not through heroics, but through presence, through sitting in the dark and cleaning a shotgun, and holding my arm on the highway, and refusing to let me do any of this alone. Find your nieces, I said. Find a way to live with this, he said. And he meant it not as advice, but as a shared assignment. He drove south. I watched the dust trail until the canyon swallowed it. The Carver Ranch became our life. Not by choice exactly, but by the logic of survival. The place had water, food, defense, and people. And leaving it meant trading certainty for speculation. Dale Carver ran the compound with the quiet authority of a man who'd spent his life managing land and livestock, and saw no fundamental difference between that and managing a community of 32 displaced strangers. Work was assigned, rotations set, resources rationed. I fell into the structure gratefully. After 3 years of underground labor, ranch work felt like a vacation conducted on the surface of the sun. I repaired fences. I stood night watch. I helped Dale's son Marcus reinforce the south perimeter where the terrain was weakest. I taught Eli to check and set the water pump. I carried Grace on my shoulders across the yard and pretended the world beyond the fence was just a place we hadn't explored yet. I was useful. I was present. I was accounted for. But I couldn't stop thinking about the church. It started as a thought and became a weight, and the weight became a direction. My mother was standing in a white clapboard building 60 miles south, dead and upright, wearing her reading glasses, facing a door she would never open. The logbook had said secured. The spray paint had said, do not open. Everyone agreed. The church was sealed, the turned were contained, and there was nothing to be done. Renee agreed. Dale agreed. The logic was unassailable. But the logic didn't account for what it meant to know your mother was standing in the dark, not buried, not at rest, not released from the thing her body had become. Just standing. Waiting for a door to open, or a wall to rot, or time to do what time does to clapboard, and cattle gates, and roofing nails. 2 weeks into our stay at the ranch, I told Renee I was going back to Dunphy. She didn't argue. She didn't ask why. She sat on the edge of our bunk and looked at me with the expression she used when she understood a diagnosis before the patient did. You're going to put her down. I couldn't say the words, so I nodded. Alone? I have to. You don't have to. Renee, she's my mother. She's standing in a church wearing her reading glasses. I can't leave her like that. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Come back." It was not a request. It was the same thing she'd said to me every time I went underground. The same 2 words, carrying the same weight, meaning, I have done the math on what I can survive, and your absence exceeds it. I drove to Dunphy alone in a ranch truck with a borrowed rifle and a shovel. The canyon road was unchanged. The landscape didn't care what had happened to the people in it. The sage bloomed. The creek bed stayed dry. The mineral deposits glinted in the sun. The church was as we'd left it. The cattle gate was still wired to the frame. The spray paint still shouted its warning. I sat in the truck for 20 minutes and breathed. Then I got out and unwired the gate. The door swung inward. The interior was dim, the bedsheets still covering the windows. The smell hit me first, not what I expected, not the smell of decay, but something dry and mineral, like the deep rock at level 42, like the earth reclaiming what it had lent. They were still standing, 12 or 13 figures motionless, oriented toward the door, toward me. They didn't move when the light hit them. They didn't react to the sound of my boots on the plank floor. They stood like they'd been waiting so long they'd forgotten what they were waiting for. My mother was where I'd seen her through the window. 3rd row from the back, near the wall. Her hands at her sides, her reading glasses on her face. Her eyes open, fixed, seeing something that wasn't in the room. I approached her slowly. The rifle was in my hands, and my finger was on the guard, and every step was a negotiation between the part of me that had come here to do a necessary thing and the part of me that was walking toward his mother in a church on a Thursday morning and couldn't make that mean what it needed to mean. I stopped 3 feet from her. Up close, she looked like herself. That was the cruelty of it, not that she was monstrous, but that she was almost. The same white hair, the same reading glasses, the same posture, straight-backed, composed, the posture of a woman who had carried herself with a dignity that refused negotiation. But her skin was the wrong color, and her eyes didn't track, and her chest didn't rise. "Mom?" Nothing. "I'm here. I came back." Her head turned, slowly, not toward my voice, toward my movement. The distinction mattered. A mother turns toward her child's voice. This turn toward motion, toward stimulus, toward the mechanical fact of a living body displacing air in a closed room. I raised the rifle. I held it steady. I looked through the sight at the face that had looked down at me from the edge of every bed I'd ever been sick in. The face that had told me my father was dead. The face that had held Grace for the first time and said, "She has your mouth, Colton." I could not pull the trigger. I stood there for a full minute with the rifle aimed and my finger on the trigger, and I could not do it. Not because I was afraid, not because I doubted it was right, but because the distance between knowing what must be done and being the hand that does it is not a distance measured in inches or in logic. It is measured in something the body knows that the mind can't override. And my body knew this was my mother, and my body would not kill her twice. I lowered the rifle. I stepped back. I took the shovel from the truck and I dug a grave in the hard ground behind the church, in the sun, near a juniper tree that had been growing there longer than anyone in that building had been alive. I dug it deep and I dug it right, and when it was done, I went back inside and I let her out. She followed. Not because she knew me, because I moved toward the door and movement was the only language she had left. I walked her into the sun, and she stood beside the grave, and I put my hand on her shoulder. The muscle beneath the skin was rigid and cool and utterly still. I did it with the rifle. One shot. She fell and I caught her, and I laid her in the ground, and I buried her under the juniper tree, and I marked it with a stone, and I sat beside it until the sun was low, and the canyon was filling with shadow. Then I went back to the church, and I did the same for the others. 12 graves, the rest of the afternoon and into the evening. Strangers, all of them. But none of them had anyone else coming. I was the one who was there, so I was the one who did it. My mother would have expected nothing less. I drove back to the ranch in the dark. Renee was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask how it went. She looked at the dirt on my clothes and the emptiness in my face, and she understood. We stayed at the Carver Ranch through the summer. Harlan arrived in June with Adedayo and a convoy of 11 survivors from Battle Mountain. Luis sent word through a relay network in August. He'd found his nieces alive in Tonopah, living with a neighbor, and he was staying. I never heard from him again, but I carry the message like a coin in my pocket, and I take it out some nights and hold it. Eli grew 3 inches. Grace started reading chapter books. Renee ran the ranch's medical station with the materials she had and the knowledge she'd carried out of a collapsing hospital. I mind nothing. I built fences and dug irrigation trenches and stood watch and raised my children in a world that demanded I be present for every minute of their lives, in a way the old world never had. I think about my mother every day. Not the way she was in the church, the way she was in the kitchen, packing the blue suitcase, the way she was in the gymnasium, organizing the tent row, the way she walked into the church on her own, 2 feet, and told Grace she was going to rest in the pretty building. She saved them. She saved all of them. And I was 4,000 feet underground, drilling into rock while she did it. I finished what she started. That's all I can say. I brought them the rest of the way, and I buried her in the sun where she belongs. And I live now in the world she handed me, smaller, harder, more precious than gold.